from Malcolm Lane and John Crook. Good note those, please. Moving quickly on to the second item, which is declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest to note at this stage, please? I assume that's a no, in which case we move on to item 3. Item 3 is a public open forum. This is the opportunity whereby members of the public can make written or oral representations to this committee. I'm not aware that any members of the public wish to make those representations at this stage, so in which case we move on to item 4. Item 4 is the action list from the previous meetings. We have 2 actions. The first is in respect of the commissioning framework being brought back to this committee, and I've agreed with officers that we'll defer this item to our June meeting because I understand that the work is not as developed as we initially thought, so I'm comfortable with that proposed deferral. Do members have any observations? In which case, the second item is respect of the FPOP Organisation Development Framework, and members will have received an email some weeks ago, so I'm happy to close that item. In which case, we'll move swiftly on to agenda item 5. Agenda item 5 is the capital and treasury management strategies for the next financial year. And if I could ask John Davis, our Head of Finance, supported by Dan Francis, Finance Business Partner, to introduce the item, and then we'll go to questions and comments. So over to you initially, John.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Jonathan Davis, Head of Finance. So I'll just spend a few minutes, if it's okay, just to run through some of the headlines from the strategy report. The committee will have seen many iterations now of these strategies, so I won't try and rehearse many of the things that are included within this around prudential code or mechanics of capital finance, but I'll try to focus on what has changed year upon year. Taking the capital strategy firstly, it's largely remaining in a steady state compared to 25-26 version. And I think the overall strategic principles are working well for us. That's been demonstrated through the most recent budget process that we've just been through. And the principles that are within the strategy very much guided the process and the deliberations of the capital investments and pressures coming forward. The most visible change, I think, since the previous version is probably the scale of the capital programme. We've seen now the commitment for investment in Abergavenny 3 to 19 school fall out of the forward programme. So that means year on year there's a reduction in that overall expenditure profile over the 4 years. So what remains now within the forward programme represents a steady state level of investment rather than the peaks we've seen over recent years. As a consequence of that has implications for both the capital strategy and the treasury strategy. The immediate borrowing requirement reduces as that school falls out of the programme. And that does reduce short-term pressures on the need for borrowing, but also on future spikes in MRP, minimum revenue provision, and in interest costs. But I think it's important that we don't interpret that steady state programme as meaning that capital pressures have reduced overall. There's a section within the report in section 6 that talks to those pressures that sit outside of the programme, those significant infrastructure and asset backlog pressures that remain for us, particularly across property, highways, as we well know at the moment, and our operational assets. The budget process was clear on these, that many of these pressures haven't yet been able to be fully assessed or costed. It's why they haven't been able to be included within the next year's capital programme. Addressing them properly is going to mean full business cases coming forward, options appraisals, prioritisation, and also we'll be looking for external funding streams to help support some of those. So it's very likely that some of those pressures are going to require additional investment and also additional borrowing. So that will change the landscape of some of the figures and data that we've got within the strategy. Linked to this, I think there's a section there's a section 6 that highlights the uncertainty around capital grant funding. We've tried to be a little bit more robust this year in terms of our wording around this, and it's where we have funding that is often short term. It's announced late in any budget process, and very much key, it's restricted in its use. So at times this can encourage reactive investment, and it places pressure on our delivery capacity. So I think what this strategy therefore tries to adapt and flex upon is that we place greater emphasis on clear outcomes that are aligned with both our asset strategies, our community and corporate plan, that ensures that those schemes are relevant, but they're also affordable and deliverable, even if those grant assumptions that they're based on change. So I think taking all those together, the strategy is a cautious one, and we'd always expect it to be that. But I think what we've tried to reflect in this updated version is, I guess, an honesty about the scale and scope of the future capital investment required. So I think overall, as I said at the outset, it's working well for us, and those guiding principles certainly have been a core feature of the budget process we've just been through. Moving on to the Treasury Management Strategy, again, this very much represents a steady state in terms of our approach. Whilst the principles and strategic approach within it hasn't changed, naturally we've updated a lot of our assumptions, for example, around bank rate, around borrowing rates, and that forward look around what that may mean for us as a net borrower from the market. Lower investment returns are assumed. I think we expect bank rate to reduce moderately during the financial year, but again, lots of things playing into how that may develop through the year. But we're not relying on Treasury income as a sole contributor to dealing with our revenue pressures. So that remains sound in terms of approach. You've heard me often talk around our approach to internal borrowing. That remains a core feature of the strategy. That's based on the liability benchmark that is outlined in the strategy, and shows as time develops when we will need to borrow from the market. That is based on planned investment, and we have to be conscious, as I've just mentioned in the introduction to the capital strategy, that things may change, and we may need to be flexible around some of that as further priorities become clear. One new element just to highlight this year is within the minimum revenue provision and the flexibility that Welsh Government has written into legislation for next financial year, which is a flexibility to charge a reduced MRP in 2026-27 if a council can demonstrate this remains prudent within their framework. I think the strategy is clear that this use would be temporary. It would require explicit full council approval, and it would need to be unwound in future years, which is a key element of it. At the current time, this isn't something that we're looking to take advantage of. We will review it through the year as time progresses, but we've set a balanced revenue budget, and we expect that to be approved for next financial year. So the benefit of looking at that MRP charge and any changes to that is not something that we're looking to immediately carry out. I think just finally on investments, our position overall continues to try to de-risk some of those. Security and liquidity remain priority, especially in light of our internal borrowing approach. And our commercial investments exposure has reduced year on year. So our commercial income now represents around 1.2% of our overall net revenue budget. That is down from 1.5% in the current year. So I think overall, the Treasury Management supports the capital strategy that is outlined and prioritises, as I've mentioned, the risk management of our Treasury position when taking into account the overall capital programme that we have in place. Thanks, Chair. Happy to leave it there at the moment and welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you, John. So to remind members, we've been asked to comment on and endorse these strategies for onward consideration by the Cabinet. And if I've understood John correctly, the strategies remain fundamentally unchanged because they've served us well. And this is, I would characterise as an annual review of the existing strategies. And John set out some relatively immaterial changes to assumptions. Before I go into members of questions, John, can I just pick up on one point? You characterise the capital strategy as being cautious. Could you say a few more words about what you mean by that, please?
Thanks, Chair. So I think what we're outlining within the capital strategy is I think cautious, prudent. I think but both are relevant in the context of the strategy. But what we're looking to achieve through this is an affordable capital programme, one that doesn't overly rely and expose us to high amounts of borrowing, but that needs to be balanced with investment. I think the strategy talks to the whole life cycle of assets, council's assets, and the fact that the condition of some assets will pull heavily on revenue budgets if those need to be maintained and are towards the end of their life. So it may be that further investment in that context is advisable and needed. And represents a lower cost option than just simply continuing with an asset in its current state. So I think when we talk about cautious, I think maybe balanced was probably a better word for it. So it's balancing that affordability context with the need for an asset base that allows and continues to allow the council the opportunity to deliver good quality services to residents.
Thank you, John. Very helpful. Go to questions and comments from members. If I go to Phil first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. John, we pay an awful lot of interest inevitably because we've spent an awful lot of our capital assets, and we've robbed it every year to support the budget on service changes and all of that sort of thing. Are you comfortable with the anticipated level of capital receipts? The reason I'm asking that is that, well, this isn't a question for you, but I'll give it to you for context. In my ward, I've got 2 farms. They're non-core farms. There's no right of succession. They want to buy them and pay the market price. That's for a cabinet decision, I know. But what's behind my question, apart from the fact I'm trying to protect their livelihoods, is you know, do you feel that the anticipated capital receipts are adequate, or do you think there should be a policy of selling off more assets to reduce the pressure and therefore reduce the amount of interest that hits the revenue budget?
Thanks for the question. I think it's a good one. I think what probably we need to play back into is the wider asset management strategy and our approach to our council assets as a whole. It's important that those continue to work for us. So I think that takes precedence over generating any one single capital receipt for financial benefit. I say that because, you know, a capital receipt is a one-off use. You'll appreciate that. And sometimes for capital investment, it isn't overly helpful because of that. And planning for it can be difficult. So over the past few years, we've been able to use the capital receipts pool we do have for more revenue purposes through capitalisation direction. That has worked well for us as a policy. I think what is also important is you mentioned at the outset there the level of interest and minimum revenue provision we make as a council and the affordability of that. They're intrinsically linked with capital receipts, reserves, and everything else that we can put towards capital investment. And ultimately, it is that affordability that is important to us. Within the report, it outlines that we're planning to be at around 6% in terms of that level of financing cost compared to our overall revenue budget. It's hard to say whether that 6% is in, you know, the right place. I think we've generally been comfortable with accounts as a council of being between 5 and 8%. I think being any lower than that exposes us to not investing sufficiently in our asset base, and similarly, anything higher than 8 feels, you know, quite a stretch for us in terms of that cost. So I think overall, it's taking all of those things in the round. But just to finish on the point about capital receipts, it's not something at the moment that we're bringing into our capital programme planning because of the minimum levels we have. We have a replacement local development plan process that will develop and come to fruition. That will give us a more clarity on the level of receipts that we can expect over time, and what potentially that could give us as a base to make further investment as well.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for that. I was going to ask you about MRP, but you covered that pretty well in your initial thing. Was it about 10 years ago we altered the basis? We completely changed our basis to the current one. Clearly, from what you said in the opening and in the report, there's no plans to go back to any other method of calculating it.
Thanks, Chair. So I think we've revisited our MRP policy twice, once in 2018 and I think once probably around 3 years ago. The first time was for I think supported borrowing, the second time for unsupported borrowing. We're generally comfortable with our approach, and that's reaffirmed annually, as you know, through this strategy. It's given us a level of minimum revenue provision that is affordable. It's based into our forward revenue budget plans. We will obviously stay close to any developments, either locally or nationally, on MRP. But I think our policy at the present time we're very comfortable with.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
If I could go to Peter, please.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up firstly on some of the comments, John, that you made in response to the Chair's question, particularly his point about financing costs spread over the useful life of assets. You seem to be implying in what you said a few moments ago, but wasn't really clear in the report. But that's not really a choice, but something that's sort of you're pushed into in order to make the repayments affordable. Yeah. But there are clear dangers to that, which you alluded to, in that, well, does it not lock us into a cycle of borrowing? No sooner have you paid off a particular asset and it's gone beyond its useful life, and you've got to borrow again immediately in order to replace it. Or even worse, as you alluded to, you're actually artificially prolonging the useful life and therefore incurring expense of maintenance or whatever. I'm thinking of schools that supposedly have a 50-year useful life, some of which I know were in a really bad state by the time they got to the end of that 50 years. So I'd like a bit more comment on the rationale behind that. A different point, you make reference, I think very correctly, to the shorter gap between notification of funding for the Welsh Government and having to put the plans in of how you're going to spend that money, and that's raised its ugly head again this week with the local growth fund. How do we mitigate against that seemingly fairly predictable problem? It's probably for other departments to answer this, ones who are anxious to spend this money. Do we have, for example, any sort of oven-ready plans or spade-ready plans that you can, mix my metaphors, take off the shelf, adjust them in order to be able to put in a plan within the very short time limits? Because otherwise, of course, there's that grave danger, which I think is implicit in what you're saying, that you're not actually getting the best value for money. Haste rather than prudence, really. So again, I appreciate you might not be able to deal with that one, because that would be more for highways and people like that. One more for you. A lot of the plan seems to be predicated on pretty stable interest rates. I think the question is, how confident are you that they're going to stay like that? Because we do have an international situation which is in the hands of some fairly unpredictable individuals, and all sorts of things. Even within the country, things can happen that can lead to unexpected increases in interest rates. How far would interest rates need to rise before, well, put it another way, what impact would a significant rise in interest rates have upon us as a council, particularly in terms of having to finance that borrowing?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the questions. So if I take them in turn. So I think initially your question around the financing costs of assets, and I guess maybe paraphrasing, but does that lock us into decision making in effect? But I think just we need some distinction firstly between perhaps what MRP is. It's a financing mechanism for us as a council, so it's not an asset management decision. So if an asset is disposed of, we will make adjustments to our MRP accordingly. There's no requirement to keep an asset simply because we have an MRP charge on it. So it doesn't drive asset decisions. That is all part of the wider asset management strategy for the authority. And that determines whether our assets remain fit for purpose, not any remaining finance charges. So, I think it's important to have that distinction. And, that's why the guiding principles of the capital strategy are important for us as we look at the forward capital programme. The second question then around grant funding, I think it's important here that you talk around, oven ready schemes. We wouldn't naturally have schemes ready, and you wouldn't expect us to. That would imply that we've got prior commitment, prior costs. What we do have are, I guess, oven ready priorities. So those are kind of aligned with the Cabinet's community and corporate plan and the objectives of forwarding that. And it's that will allow us to respond quickly as and when any notifications are made, i.e. local growth fund, and allow us to react to that. As I touched upon in the introduction to the capital strategy, it's important that any capital investment decision is guided by those principles and takes into account what is important to us as a council at a point in time, but also looking strategically around where we want our services to be in the future. Lots of things within that I won't go into in detail, but that won't just be about physical assets. That'll be around growth in digital capability, data, so lots within that. I think finally you touched on the interest rate environment. We'd all love to have a crystal ball within this. I think what we have within the strategy is balance, a balance of risk. There are many indicators within this that gives us that environment that we're not overly exposed to one change in one stream of indicator. So, for example, we have a maturity structure of our borrowing that we have to adhere to, which means that a certain percentage of our borrowing is always longer term. So that reduces our exposure to short-term variation in rates. On the investment side, we have a diversified portfolio of investments. We have pooled funds that expose us to equities, property, bond markets. So it's not just all in cash. We're not exposed to simply that variable in cash interest rates. You're right to highlight that it is still volatile in terms of the geopolitical situation that we're facing. But we base the strategy on data that we have at the present time, but also allow a buffer for some of that risk to change.
Thank you. Can I go to Tony first, please?
Hello, yeah, thank you. At the last audit meeting, we noticed there was a modest return on some of our assets, particularly Newport Leisure Park. There was no indication at that time that there was what seems to be a 15% reduction in the value of that asset. What has happened? That was over the period of 12 months of 31st of 3rd, 2025. Has there been a downward trend up till now? And what has been the problem? Is there a problem which has caused the valuation to reduce by maybe 60-70%?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Easton. I'll perhaps come in first, and if Peter Davis, our Deputy Chief Exec, wants to follow in as director for the area, that's fine. On the valuation side of Newport Leisure Park, as you'd expect, it's quite a complex valuation carried out by our external valuers, supported by our estates team. It's very much based around the rolling rent on that asset. And as you'll be aware, over the past 12 to 18 months, we've had some changes both within that rental position, with one of the anchor tenants looking to renegotiate their position. That was Cineworld, and I think that's well documented within the committee over the past meetings. That naturally has an impact on what that rolling rent roll looks like over the coming period. Break clauses and changes to those and any renegotiations within those will also have an impact on what that rent roll looks like. But also the valuation is impacted by external factors. What does the local market look like in terms of retail? How strong is the covenant around some of those? So lots of things involved in the valuation of that asset. So it's not one specific thing that's driving that. But it's something as an asset that has continued to prove strong for us as an income generator. We're not quite at what the original target was of 2% above borrowing costs, but it's still delivering income for us that negates the need to raise income elsewhere or reduce service delivery. Why is that important? Well, it's an important diversification for us. I think I touched upon in the introduction that we're not overly exposed to generating commercial income to fund our revenue budget. That has reduced year on year. So, whilst this I can understand looks and remains something we need to keep a close eye on, it's something that continues to perform well for us as an asset.
So the commercial value is based on rolling rentable value for the whole of the estate as opposed to bricks and mortar value. Is that correct? So has there been a downward trend since 25 to now? Or are we going in the right direction?
There will be another annual valuation coming up after the end of March. Not close enough to the local market to know what that's looking like in terms of retail, but there hasn't been any significant changes in terms of rent roll that will impact year on year on that valuation. But we will see variation in that value. But as I said, there's lots of factors that play into that.
Yeah, if I can come in, Chair, and thanks to John, more so for probably covering off 99% of my need to input on anything. So I think the only 2 points to add, or might be one in a rounded sense. So I think, Councillor Eason, your question or your sourcing of comfort here is to sort of understand as to whether there is an onward decline here in the valuation. I think if I just sort of play back to John's input, the context here and the point around Cineworld is the key one. That is the significant event that I think has occurred certainly over recent years and since acquisition. And I guess that has been felt, that adjustment, that restructuring of Cineworld, and therefore the renegotiation of the lease terms with Cineworld and retaining them, importantly, at Newport Leisure Park. So I think what you see there on the table and the figure of the notable reduction, that is a one-off reduction caused by that. And then to wrap that, and I think this is consistent, I think, with the input that I think I made at the last meeting when asked, just in terms of the general performance of the commercial investment portfolio across Newport Leisure Park and Castlegate. To John's point, we have one solitary unit that is not currently leased at Newport Leisure Park, and we are currently going through a process of diligence with an active interest. So fingers crossed, we may get ourselves into full occupancy in the near future, which to John's again point will get us towards that benchmark return.
Could I go to Rodri first and then Sarah?
Thanks, Chair. Excuse if this is a naive question, John, but inflation's discussed in the report and we've highlighted it through discussions. On page 15 of the pack, we've got the capital medium-term financial plan with investments for the next 4 years. There's a number with static numbers of planned investments over the 4 years. So I was just wondering how realistic they are, given the fact that we know there's going to be inflationary factors over those periods. And connected to that, you've talked about balancing risk. Later on in the document, I think it's in the governance section, it says about residual capital budget of 1.78 mil to help support further capital investment. And I was just wondering how confident you are that that's the right figure, and would that flux over the period of the strategy?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the question. I'll probably come back to that second point in a second, see if I can find that reference. But in terms of the first point around the forward capital programme, I think this is a real mix. In some cases, this will be driven by external factors. So, for instance, within regeneration, that is very much our contribution to the wider city deal arrangement, and that will be dependent on how those contributions are programmed through their investment. But in others, such as vehicle leasing, that is a headroom budget, as I would term it. It's not a target. It's there as an available budget to manage vehicle replacement through the year. But I think in some of those other lines, I think there's a valid point. Inflation has been a factor and has limited our ability at times to invest. So I think the figures reflect what is currently affordable. But I think what we're seeing in terms of some of that flatlining of some of those figures are the reality of where our programme has been from an affordability perspective over recent years. We have had significant revenue budget pressures that haven't enabled us to make those inroads into the backlog capital pressures that we may otherwise have liked. We know, and I think as I mentioned in the outset, there are some pressures that are sitting outside the programme that we need urgent attention to. And that is something that we may have to bring in. But ultimately, there is an annual budget process for capital. And if some of those, I guess, static budgets are becoming an issue, that is where they're flagged. And we deal with that through the prioritisation process, guided by the principles in the capital strategy.
Sorry, John, if I help you with the 1.78 million, just to lean you back in on it, it's the sum that's been held back for non-treasury investments, commercial investments, for future investment.
Thanks. So we had an asset investment strategy for commercial investments that was developed in 2018. That gave a total budget of 50 million in terms of that investment headroom. as the committee will know, there were two significant investments, one in Castlegate and one in Newport Leisure Park. There was a residual amount that has been held within the capital budget that supports the further need for capital investment on those existing assets. So it's not for any new commercial investments. It's where, for example, a tenant may leave one unit. We're looking to advertise that and bring in a new occupant into that, and we may need to tweak some of the nature of the unit to make it attractive to a new tenant. So that is where that budget is available. Ultimately, that is financed through the rent rolls that we have in place and the rental income that comes from the asset.
Okay, thank you. Could I go Sarah, please?
Thanks, Chair. John, there have been a number of motions that have come to council in the recent years and been approved on ethical investment. Now, I realise the practical problems of implementing that, where we're looking at funds, managed funds, but I couldn't see much change in the strategy. So I'm wondering if you can talk us through how those decisions of council are being implemented.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the question, Councillor Birch. I think firstly, it's probably just important to outline, I think I mentioned at the outset, around our internal borrowing strategy. The consequence of that means that we have very, very limited investments as an authority. So the day-to-day target is to keep that around £10 million where possible. That allows us to use all of those surplus funds to negate the need to borrow externally. What that means, in effect, is that we have to keep our investments very short-term and liquid. That is usually cash, usually readily available money market funds, which are instruments very much like cash that are invested day by day. But we also have a pool of pooled funds that invest in, as I said, equities, bonds, property, for example. So why is that important? Well, I think it does limit where we can invest our funds. They need to be held in a liquid instrument and be readily available. We're obviously cognizant of the council motions that have come through on this, and you're quite right that our approach to ESG within the strategy probably doesn't look any different year on year. Where we have struggled operationally is having ready live data to inform our investments day by day. So, for example, an investment in an overnight money market fund will be within a wider pool of investments. Those investments will invest in other things, and it'll trickle down to lots of other areas. I think where we've tried to address the motions through council is through prioritisation of investment. So wherever possible, we're trying to prioritise our single ESG fund that is available as a short-term investment, and the team will prioritise that. I think where we have difficulty in working towards the motion that was endorsed by council is within our pooled funds. because we know, and the committee will know from previous Treasury reports, that we still have existing capital deficits in those funds. So if we immediately liquidise those, there's a loss to the council that we'll have to manage through our budgets. So we're working towards parity on those now, and we've had updates on those previously. So it's at that point, once we look to perhaps come out of those funds, that we can look at a more purposeful approach to our ESG considerations and what that may mean for the remainder of that £10 million that we have to invest. But I think the point is quite correct there, that we haven't got an explicit reference and context there of what those council motions mean for our approach. So I think, you know, clearer signposting around that would have been advisable. I'm happy to perhaps adapt that into an updated version.
Any final questions or comments before we look to move this item? Okay. So John, thank you for the paper, and thank you for your very helpful replies to the diverse range of questions and comments. So subject to, I think, a point you made just a few moments ago about better signposting on the ESG point, I think this committee is content to endorse the strategies as presented. So thank you, John, thank you, Dan, and the team for the great work you've done in putting this together. Okay, we could move on to item 6. Item 6 is the internal audit strategy for the next financial year. If I could hand over to Jan Furtek, our Chief Internal Auditor, to introduce the paper, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this report is to request the Governance and Audit Committee to approve the internal audit strategy for 2026-27 and to move to an agile or rolling internal audit plan. So the Global Internal Audit Standards, specifically Standard 9.2, requires myself as the Chief Audit Executive to develop and implement a strategy for the function. This needs to support the objectives and successes of the organisation and meets the expectations of this committee, senior management and other key stakeholders. So the first internal audit strategy for Monmouthshire County Council was approved by this committee in May 2025. So the new amended strategy in this report recommends that Monmouthshire Council transitions from a traditional fixed single-year internal audit plan to a dynamic and agile rolling internal audit plan. So this rolling plan will be updated quarterly throughout the year, allowing for greater responsiveness to emerging risks, regulatory changes and organisational priorities. This approach is increasingly recognised as best practice, supports greater alignment with strategic objectives, and enhances the team's ability to adapt to a changing risk landscape. A small number of other Welsh local government internal audit teams have already started to take this approach. So traditionally, internal audit services operate with a fixed annual plan that's set at a single point in time before the start of the financial year. That fixed plan, while familiar and predictable, can often struggle to remain relevant as the year progresses, as risks, priorities and resource availability can change. That leaves the plan quickly out of date and potentially less effective. Whereas a rolling plan is continually refreshed, ensuring that audit coverage remains current, responsive to the organisation's needs. This transition is supported by the new Global Internal Audit Standards and aligns with the move towards integrated assurance, risk-based internal auditing and enterprise-wide risk management. The benefits and drawbacks of the rolling plan approach are included within my cover report. So the planning process will continue to take into account all possible systems, processes and establishments that could possibly be audited within Monmouthshire, so it's commonly known as our audit universe. And that would include all services, activities and functions which the Council commissions and or delivers itself via a third party or a collaborative and partnership arrangement. It's proposed that this review will now take place continuously, with documented reviews being completed on a quarterly basis and the rolling plan updated. This rolling plan will be presented to the Governance and Audit Committee for approval each quarter within my quarterly report, as you can see within the next paper coming today. So the revised internal audit strategy and the change of plan and methodology was discussed at a meeting of the strategic leadership team in January this year. They were supportive of the approach, but sought assurance that appropriate coverage would still be made across all council areas, especially those which have previously received little to no coverage. I can confirm that the reporting of audit conclusions arising from the reviews will continue to be presented to the committee promptly at the end of each quarter. As within the strategy, it's also proposed that a methodology in how the internal audit team completes its follow-up work will also be changing. So there's going to be no change to the current process when an unfavourable audit opinion has been issued. So they'll be continued to be formally followed up to confirm that the agreed actions have been implemented and controls improved. A revised conclusion will be issued and reported to the committee. For positive, substantial, reasonable assurance opinions, responsible officers will continue to complete a self-assessment. The change would be that historically those self-assessments were issued at a single point in time during the following financial year. So some areas might receive a self-assessment sooner than others. These self-assessments will now be issued in the quarter following 12 months from the date of the final report being issued to be more consistent. Again, my quarterly report will be now used moving forward to report these exercises so the committee and management receive more real-time information. Within the amended strategy and to align to the new planning approach, it's necessary to review the key performance indicators for the team. So the current suite of KPIs have been unchanged for many years and only measure against specific areas such as percentage of plan completion and timeliness of issuing draft and final reports. Within the strategy, a new list of KPIs have been included. However, this will remain subject to ongoing review, as the UK Local Authority Chief Auditors Network and more locally the Welsh Chief Auditors Group are currently examining these along with other benchmarking data to standardise across both Wales and the rest of the UK. So if we do subsequently need to change these, a further report will be taken through committee. So it's proposed that within the governance arrangements for the amended internal audit strategy and the new planning methodology, that this will be presented back through the strategic leadership team and governance and audit committee within the next 12 months to ensure the planning approach has been successfully implemented or if a return is required to the previous mechanism. Therefore, I'm asking committee to comment on and approve the audit strategy for 26-27 and that the committee specifically approve the move to a rolling internal audit plan subject to this review in 12 months' time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So questions or comments, please? I've got a Tony in the first instance. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No questions, no comments. I think it's a straightforward action and I think we should endorse it personally.
Thank you. Phil.
Happy to agree, Chair. This has obviously been thought out long and hard. It certainly makes sense. So let's see how we get on.
I was just going to say, Chair, I was in a meeting yesterday evening, and the three councils didn't have any appetite for it at the moment. So, so I think we're at the forefront of this. I assume it is. I don't know quite how you couched it, Jan, with the global internal audit standard. That that approach is openly encouraged, or how would you phrase that?
Yeah, it's not specifically included with the internal audit standards. It's what they're advising to do through position papers. And if you go on any training course with the Institute of Internal Auditors, this is very much a hot topic of trying to encourage this way forward. So like I said, be more reactive in the way that we work. So yeah, conversations that I've had with and presentations I've seen from the Institute are definitely pushing not just local authorities, but just general audit teams in this way.
Can I check? Sarah, did you want to come in? Because you still have your hand raised as well as from a previous item. Okay. Peter.
Short input. Clearly, I'm not on the committee as Deputy Chief Executive, but it's just to, I guess, it's good to have the feedback from the committee. I think if I just sort of take a read from, I guess, Chair, conversations we've had both within the committee, outside of the committee, and sort of comments from the committee, over a period of time. Risk by its very nature changes every day. So I guess having a static audit plan throughout an entire year, given how quickly change and risk occurs, I think is it's important. I think that we move forward in the right way. I think the key bit for me, and I think Jan's touched on it, is those feedback loops through SLT DMTs and making sure that we get this working effectively. So I think my counsel to Jan and Governance and Audit Committee is to sort of stick with this new approach for a period. We just got to try and get the battle rhythm going right, and that sort of ebb and flow of intelligence and communication to inform the rolling plans. And if we get that right, then I think we're going to have a real high quality audit product, even more so than we have already as a result.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, as I said, if this is clearly a no-brainer. So thank you. And I think a view of this committee is we would encourage even further innovation and the different ways of thinking and operating. You set out very clearly in the paper the financial and operational challenges across the council. We need to think and act differently. So yet again, this is a great example of some innovative thinking, which some other councils aren't quite there yet, but that's fine. We are, and that's to our credit. Okay, in which case we can endorse the strategy and then move to a more agile planning process. Thank you for that. In which case, let's move on to item 7. Item 7 is the internal audit progress report for Q3. Back to you, Jan.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just try and bring the slides up if the technology works. There we are. Okay, so the purpose of this report is to consider the adequacy of the internal control environment within the council based on the outcomes of audit reviews and conclusions issued to the 31st of December 25, so that's Q3, and to consider the performance of the internal audit team over those 9 months of the financial year. So attached as Appendix 1 to my report is the internal audit and counter fraud update, covering the period until 31st of December. As you'll see, this is the first report using an amended reporting presentation, which I hope the committee finds useful and would appreciate any feedback from members on this. So the report covers following 5 areas. So the results from internal audit reviews, follow-up of previous recommendations, the quarterly internal audit plan, as you've just approved for Q1 26-27, counter fraud investigations and outcomes, and the section's performance indicators. So it's not my intention to go through every slide during the meeting, but I'll pick out the pertinent ones. So confirm that the audit work has continued in line with the agreed plan that was approved by the Governance and Audit Committee in June 25, and that my year-end opinion will be based on the audit work undertaken during the year, cumulative audit knowledge from previous years, and knowledge of key financial systems. So in terms of the report, so first of all, to confirm the audits that have been undertaken during Q3 of the financial year. So we had 4 substantial assurance opinions that were issued, 4 reasonable assurance opinions, and 1 limited assurance opinion. So the limited assurance opinion was on the deprivation of liberty safeguards, so sometimes known as DOLS. So this concluded that there was limited assurance and there was 1 critical weakness as detailed in the presentation pack regarding the backlog of applications and with a significant number being overdue assessments, including long-standing high priority cases. So overall, there was 1 critical, 7 significant and 4 moderate weaknesses raised. So I can confirm that discussions have been held with the Strategic Director for Social Care, the Head of Adult Services and the Service Manager. Those discussions have gone extremely well. They've appreciated the audit review. Subsequent to our discussions and the report being issued, they have requested that Social Care Wales assist the authority to support a review of our management of DOLS. And they've also highlighted that the actual legislation regarding the deprivation of liberty safeguards is currently being challenged within the Supreme Court and is subject to legislative changes with UK government. So they are mindful of those changes taking place as well. They are looking to put in additional resource to ensure that this backlog can be met. Overall, I've had assurance from the team that they are trying to move this in the right direction as much as they can. Obviously subsequent to this Social Care Wales review as well. And we'll look to follow this review up in a 12-month period and obviously hopefully provide assurance back to committee that appropriate changes have since taken place. So in terms of the year to date, so up to the end of Q3, 20 conclusions have been issued, 6 substantial, 10 reasonable and 3 limited. So the limited assurances have now all been reported to committee. So moving on to the roll-in internal audit plan. So as I mentioned in my previous report, we have a list of non-negotiable audits that have been devised between myself and the Section 151 officer. So these reviews will be completed on a cyclical, ideally a 3-year basis, covering some of the key financial systems and key areas of the council. As you can see from this slide, it details when those areas were last reviewed and when we anticipate that they will be reviewed next. So there's a couple that are within the Q1 internal audit plan and a few others that will be looked at through the rest of the year. But obviously, as risks change, we can move those up or move those down as is necessary. So I'm requesting that the committee approve the audit plan for Q1. So listed within this slide are the reviews that we plan to undertake. So as I mentioned, corporate safeguarding and procurement are on that non-negotiable list. Sevenview Park will be partly as a follow-up, given the previous unfavourable report within that area. We've got a couple of primary schools within that plan, so we'll continue to look at primary schools on a cyclical basis as well. And some other reviews, such as school admissions, that were within the 2025-26 plan that we're unlikely to be able to complete prior to year end. So they've been moved into Q1. Moving on to our counter fraud areas. So we've currently got 3 investigations which are all ongoing. One relating to overtime payments, which is a cross-cutting review across the council. One which is school-based and one which is based in social care and health. So we'll report conclusions on them as and when necessary. And the outcomes that have been closed and reported for this year. So we've had 4 investigations and the outcomes are listed there. So they've ranged from disciplinary hearings with referrals to the Disclosure and Barring Service. And there's also been a referral to Gwent Police where there was no further action deemed necessary. The slide on counter fraud initiative, I'm not going to spend too long on this one because it's the same data that was provided during the last meeting, but just to inform committee that we are still taking part in that and looking to complete as much of that by the 31st of March as possible. And then the final slide is the current performance indicators. So as I mentioned, they're going to be subject to change for next year. We're currently just behind our profile plan target of 50%. In reality, that relates to just not getting one audit review over the line as of the end of the quarter. So it's nothing major at all. The rest of the indicators are all on track. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So a couple of comments from me. So we've been asked to note the audit conclusions issued, also to note progress made by during the period, and approve the Q1 audit audit plan, I beg your pardon. So in response to the points you've raised, the format very much works for me. I think it's very clean, very clear, and an improvement on the good quality reports you previously produced. If I turn to, of two matters, turn to the Q1 plan. Could you remind me what work you do in respect to the AGS, the annual governance statement? So I know you coordinate the activity, but this document gives the impression that you do an audit of the AGS. And secondly, given the importance of change management, the so-called FPOP programme, could you maybe say a few words about your anticipated involvement in that, please, over the period?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it should have been clearer on that slide regarding the audit plan for Q1. So we do coordinate the annual governance statement. It's not an audit of the annual governance statement. We are coordinating its completion. So myself reviewing the action plan from last year and then completing an assessment across that in conjunction with SLT and colleagues. So the annual governance statement is owned by the strategic leadership team and ultimately the chief executive and the leader of the cabinet. So like I said, I'm just coordinating that. In terms of FPOP, so for purpose, on purpose, the change programme that's recently been instigated, I'm having discussions with Peter Davis and Paul Matthews regarding internal audit's involvement within that. It's a fairly new piece of work that is just starting. So we're looking to position internal audit appropriately on that programme board moving forward.
Thank you. I think it's a view of this committee that internal audit are fully embedded in that programme, given the significance of that programme. And then before I invite Peter Davis, the Deputy Chief Executive, to comment, one pedantic point on page 85 of the pack, your table labelled summary of audit value added. I would strongly suggest, Jan, that all the audits are value added. So maybe think of a different term. No need to respond.
Noted.
Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it'd be remiss of me, I guess, just to sort of come in and supplement Jan's input just in terms of the organisational change programme for purpose, on purpose. So it's probably worthwhile. I know that the action was satisfied, as was confirmed earlier. I know that the grounding of initial information that looked to launch FPOP, as I will refer to it, was shared. Context, I think, is important in terms of the work around FPOP being formative. The governance, which I think should be the important focus of the Governance and Audit Committee. The governance around FPOP is currently being built. Really important elements to just provide quick update on. One is in terms of the development of the Programme Management Office and capability for FPOP. And that will see itself to maintain oversight over the array of existing change programmes that operate across the council, as well as to new ones that will be identified and taken forward. And by its very nature, let's just be clear that the introduction of any change programme from this point forward will still constitutionally require the same level of decision making in terms of any resources that need to be committed or otherwise. So transparency, openness and visibility would be afforded in all the usual ways. But to my point, the Programme Management Office has just been established. There is a Programme Assurance Board that is sat within the governance that is yet to meet. It will meet probably in March, if not in early April, to have its inaugural meeting to set its terms of reference and to start its work in earnest. So hopefully that context is important just to explain, I guess, the formative nature of the programme of work. I think to the point around Jan and internal audit's involvement, I see it somewhat in being twofold. I will stay step removed as I need to, or sorry, Jan will set himself one step removed, set it the other way. And I guess to the extent with the rolling internal audit plan, to the extent that Jan determines through with the Governance and Audit Committee that he wants to afford a lens in looking at the arrangements around FPOP, that's entirely within his gift in terms of assessment of risk and other factors. In terms of the other aspect, I wouldn't necessarily expect Jan to be sat on the Programme Assurance Board necessarily. What I would expect is for Jan and internal audit, as they currently already do, in a slightly voluntary capacity, beyond identified audit work, is to offer of their time and input best placed early on when change projects and programs come to fruition, so that they can appropriately advise on that. Because whilst in an organizational wide change program context, the governance is important, it's also equally important at an individual project and program level. And clearly, Jan and the internal audit team's input into that to make sure that those arrangements are being well developed is always important. And I know that happens regardless anyway. So hopefully that's just sort of helpful, just in terms of providing current context. And I would think there would be an appropriate time, I'm sure, that yourself, Chair, and the committee would probably like that to come back into committee once that governance is established, and that you can get your own assurances around that.
Thank you, that was helpful. If I could just come back on a couple of points. I think we're in agreement here, but let's just test that. So you talked about Programme Assurance Board. I would expect Jan to have access to all the papers and be an attendee at that board meetings, not a decision maker. Clearly, we can discuss it if there's any difference of opinion of that. And you're quite right. Yes, I do expect internal audit to be have involvement and or access to the project boards for individual projects. Yet again, all of this up for discussion, but I think I've heard you say it's an open door for Jan. It's his call in terms of his involvement, and I think we're just expressing a supporting noises in that regard.
Absolutely, and just to be very clear, and again, in terms of the power wielded by Jan, he has unequivocal access, as does his team, to all parts of the organisation. So that is given regardless whether it's the change programme or any other operation within the organisation. In terms of Jan, there is naturally an open door to Jan and the team to sit as an observer, to your point, on the Programme Assurance Board, as he has divine right to open any door into sitting as an observer in any other conversation that takes place across the organisation. So I just wanted to just make that clear.
Thank you. Having divine right sounds quite powerful, so I like that. I'll remember that term. Sarah.
Thanks. Obviously, we have to take this issue of deprivation of liberty safeguards being inadequate extremely serious. I mean, seriously. I mean, that's, deprivation of liberty is one of the greatest powers that any authority can wield, and safeguards have to be in place. So I'm really pleased to hear that the service are fixing it as quickly as possible. I'm sure that there are issues that have arisen due to shortage of staff and pressure of work and so on. But a lot of the problems seem to be on a Gwent-wide footprint. So I was going to ask whether that has been escalated regionally through Regional Partnership Board or through neighbouring authorities. Obviously, our concern is to get Monmouthshire's house in order, but having found a problem, we should share it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Birch. So I can confirm that although the internal audit review specifically looked at Monmouthshire County Council and our aspect of it, obviously we were part of a regional consortium in relation to deprivation of liberty safeguards. My understanding is that the internal audit report has been presented to the Gwent-wide board and the heads of adult services as well, so they've got awareness of it, and obviously we're taking appropriate action ourselves to make sure that the issues have been addressed from a Monmouthshire perspective.
Any more questions or comments, please, before we look to move on? No, I think we're good, so we can note and approve the various elements of our paper. Thank you once again, Jan. Move on to item 8. Item 8 is the forward work plan for this committee. Do members have any observations, please? No, I think we're content, noting that we are shifting the date of the Commission framework item from April to June. Item 9 is to approve the minutes of our last meeting. Any comments before we look to improve implicitly these minutes?
Happy with those, Chair.
Okay, those minutes are approved. And the final item is just a note the date of our next meeting, for that being 16th of April. And that brings to conclusion this meeting. Thank you for your attendance. I look forward to seeing you in April.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.